We often think of history as something fixed, inevitable, that the world we live in today is how things were always meant to be. But what if I told you that the entire shape of modern civilization almost changed forever? Because there was a time when Germany came dangerously close to winning World War I. If one battle had gone differently, if one decision had been made at the right moment, the world we know might never have existed. No United States rising to power, no League of Nations, no Hitler, maybe no Holocaust, and perhaps a German empire still standing strong in the 21st century. So let's imagine, what if Germany had won WW1? In the summer of 1914, the war began with confidence on both sides. Generals believed it would end by Christmas. But by 1917, Europe was exhausted, torn apart by machines, mud, and death. Yet, Germany wasn't defeated. Not yet. In fact, in many ways, they were winning. Let's rewind. Let's look at the turning points. Because history didn't have to go the way it did. It all started with a plan, the Schlieffen Plan, designed to win the war in weeks. Germany's idea: invade France through Belgium, knock them out fast, then turn east and crush Russia before they could fully mobilize. It nearly worked. The Germans reached the outskirts of Paris. They came within miles of breaking the French front. But then, the Battle of the Marne happened, and the war turned into trenches. While the Western Front bogged down, Germany crushed Russia in the east. By 1918, with the Russian Revolution raging, Germany forced Russia to surrender in the brutal Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. They took control of massive territories: Ukraine, Poland, the Baltics. This gave them resources, time, and a chance to focus everything west. So, in early 1918, with Russia gone and America not yet fully in the fight, Germany launched their final push, Operation Michael, their last great hope to win the war. In March 1918, Germany launched a massive offensive across the Western Front. Troops moved with new tactics: stormtroopers, infiltration warfare, surprise attacks. For weeks, they broke the stalemate. They advanced further than anyone had in years, but not far enough. The Allies held. American troops arrived, and by November 1918, the war was over. Germany surrendered. The Kaiser fled. The empire fell. But what if they hadn't? What if Operation Michael had broken the Allied lines? What if Berlin had stood tall at the end of the war? Then the world wouldn't remember WW1 as a tragedy. It would fear it as the birth of a new global order led by Germany. Let's imagine a world where the Allies didn't hold. where Operation Michael didn't stall in the mud of France, where the Kaiser's stormtroopers pushed past the trenches and finally broke the front line. What would that moment have meant? It would have meant one thing. Germany was coming to Paris. If the Germans had reached Paris, it wouldn't have been just symbolic. It would have been decisive. The French government would have fled. Morale across the Allied lines would have shattered. And with Paris under German control, the war might have ended not in 1918, but in early 1918, with Germany victorious on the Western Front. Imagine the headlines: Paris falls, armistice offered, Allies seek peace after German advance. The war ends in Berlin's favor. That single breakthrough could have changed everything. Without full American involvement, there would be no massive counterattack, no 100 days offensive, no sudden collapse of the German army. Instead, by mid-1918, an armistice would have been signed not in Versailles, but in Berlin. The Allies would have had little choice but to negotiate. France, occupied. Britain, exhausted. Russia, already out of the war. America, too late to change the outcome. And so, the Treaty of Berlin would have been written instead of the Treaty of Versailles. Under this new peace, Germany wouldn't have been punished. They wouldn't have lost land, colonies, or military power. In fact, they would have gained them. France would be forced to cede territory. Belgium might become a protectorate. Britain would face crippling trade concessions. And the United States would return home, having missed its chance to shape Europe. This would not have been the end of the story. It would have been the beginning of a new one. Without total defeat, there would be no Weimar Republic, no hyperinflation, no Nazi rise from despair. The German Empire would remain intact, the Kaiser still on his throne, and the world would look very different. So what happens next? Let's keep going deeper into this alternate timeline. With France defeated and Paris under German control, the war in the West is over. But Germany's ambitions are far from finished, because in the East, a new order is about to rise. Remember, by 1918, Russia was already broken. The Tsar had been overthrown. The Bolsheviks were fighting for survival. In our timeline, Germany used this chaos to force Russia out of the war via the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. They took huge chunks of land, including Finland, Poland, Ukraine, the Baltics. But in this alternate world where Germany wins the war overall, there is no Russian Civil War, no Red October, no Soviet Union. Instead, the Kaiser's army reshapes the East permanently. Without the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks never take power. Lenin remains in exile. Trotsky disappears into obscurity. And the Tsar, maybe he survived with Germany victorious in the West and dominant in the East. There's no revolution sweeping Moscow, no hammer and sickle rising across the globe, just imperial rule and German influence stretching from Berlin to the Urals. In this alternate world, Ukraine may not exist as we know it today. In our timeline, Ukraine briefly declared independence during the chaos of WW1 before being absorbed by the Soviets. But if Germany wins, that independence doesn't happen. Instead, Ukraine becomes part of the Mitteleuropa plan, Germany's dream of a Central European Economic Union under its control. Think of it like a 1918 version of the EU, but led by Berlin, not Brussels. No Soviet domination, no Cold War, just a continent united under German leadership without American entry, without a total Allied victory, without the Versailles humiliation. The peace treaty that follows isn't one of punishment, it's one of consolidation. Germany redraws borders, creates puppet states, controls trade routes from Paris to Kiev, and with Russia weakened, Berlin becomes the true center of Europe. This is no longer just a war story. This is the beginning of a new global balance of power. In our timeline, America changed the course of WW1. It tipped the balance, and after the war, it tried to change the world. But in this alternate reality where Germany wins the war, the United States never enters the fight. There are no doughboys charging across France. No American generals reshaping Europe. Just a quiet retreat behind isolationism. Because why would the US risk lives and money for a war already lost? Without American involvement, President Wilson never gets to shape the peace. He doesn't travel to Paris, doesn't push for his 14 points, doesn't dream of a new world order. And so the League of Nations is never created. That bold experiment in global diplomacy born from American idealism dies before it begins. No Geneva headquarters. No international body trying to prevent another war. Just a return to empires and power politics as usual. With no League of Nations, there's no pressure to reshape Europe democratically. No push for self-determination. No effort to create small nations like Czechoslovakia or Yugoslavia. Instead, Germany builds its own vision. A Mitteleuropa economic empire, a Central European alliance under German leadership, a new colonial deal, not just in Africa but in Eastern Europe. France remains weak. Britain is exhausted. Russia is defeated. And the US watches from afar. In this version of history, America never becomes a global power overnight. The war ends without them, and they see no reason to stay involved. Isolationism returns stronger than ever. The US, avoids foreign entanglements. No Marshall Plan, no NATO, maybe even no Cold War. And without that global role, would the US rise to become the superpower we know today? Or would it remain a regional force, rich, powerful, but distant from the centers of influence? So what does this mean? Without American entry into WW1, there is no League of Nations, no push for global democracy, no US shaping the 20th century, just a world where Berlin rules Europe and Washington watches silently from across the ocean. But the story isn't over yet. Let's keep going into the technology and culture that might have shaped this world. In our timeline, the US led the technological revolution of the 20th century. From aviation to computing, from space to nuclear energy, American innovation shaped the modern world. But in a world where Germany wins WW1, that future may have looked very different, because technology doesn't evolve in isolation. It evolves with power, with funding, with war. And in this alternate reality, that power rests in Berlin. WW1 was already a war of invention. Chemical weapons, aircraft, radio communication, early tanks. In our timeline, these technologies were refined by many nations, including the US and Britain. But in this version, Germany leads the charge. No crippling post-war reparations, no Weimar collapse, just steady growth under imperial rule. So what does that mean for the next few decades? Let's imagine, in our timeline, the US dominated aviation after WWIE. The Wright brothers, Charles Lindbergh, NASA, Apollo 11. But in this alternate world, Germany leads aerospace development without economic collapse or Hitler's rise. Germany's scientists aren't scattered. They're supported, funded, protected. Imagine, first transatlantic flight funded by Berlin, German rocketry programs dominating Europe, Von Braun working for Kaiserreich, not NASA. Would the first man on the moon be speaking German? Computing as we know it began in secret during WWE with British codebreakers and later US Cold War projects like ENIAC. But in this alternate history, there is no WWWI, no Manhattan Project, no race against time. Instead, Germany leads the way in scientific research. Imagine early computers built in Berlin, German universities driving artificial intelligence, no Silicon Valley, but a Berlin tech hub instead. If peace had followed German victory, their empire of science could have ruled the world? What if Einstein never left Germany? What if quantum physics developed under European empires, not American labs? In our timeline, the Manhattan Project gave the US the atomic edge. In this one, the atomic bomb might still be born in Europe just under different flags. Medical advances, chemistry, engineering, all driven by imperial ambition, not Cold War fear. This isn't just an alternate war, it's an alternate scientific revolution. So far, we've imagined a defeated France, a controlled Russia, no League of Nations, no American global role. Now, we see another layer of change. Who leads the world into the future? In this alternate world, the answer might not be Washington or Moscow. It might be Berlin. Let's keep going deeper into culture, geopolitics, and the shadow of a world without democracy. In our timeline, the British Empire ruled over a quarter of the world. But in this one, it never fully recovers from its WW1 defeat. Without American aid, without a decisive Allied victory, the British economy falters. Their colonies grow restless, and Germany rises as the new global power. So, what happens next? Let's imagine how the world might have looked if Germany had redrawn the map with no US stepping in to save the Allies. Britain is forced to negotiate peace on German terms. No more naval dominance, no more control over trade routes, no more global influence. In this alternate reality, the sun begins to set on the British Empire much earlier than in our timeline. Ireland breaks free. Australia and Canada drift toward independence. And in Asia and Africa, the winds of change begin to blow. Germany had long wanted a place in the Sun colonies in Africa and beyond. Now, after winning the war, they get their chance to reshape the world literally. With France weakened and Britain collapsing, Germany expands its influence across. German East Africa becomes a major hub. German Southwest Africa is fully controlled. Togoland and Cameroon become strategic outposts. But Berlin doesn't just want land, it wants resources, it wants markets, it wants total control. And with a strong empire behind them, that could happen. In our timeline, Indian nationalism grew stronger after WW2 fueled by Britain's weakness and American pressure. But in this world, Germany rules Europe. Britain is fading. America stays out. So what happens to India? Would Gandhi still rise? Would the Salt March ever happen? Or would India remain under European rule far longer? In this alternate world, Germany may take over some British roles in the East. India becomes part of a larger Middle Europa-style plan, not independent but managed by a new European power. And the freedom movements of the 1940s may not come until decades later or not at all. Without a League of Nations, without American influence, without Soviet resistance, the world isn't shaped by Cold War rivalry. It's shaped by empires, German dominance in Europe, Japan expanding in Asia, and a weakened Britain struggling to survive. This isn't the 20th century, you know. This is one where colonialism never ends, it evolves. So far, we've imagined a world where Germany wins WW1, Paris falls, Russia remains imperial, the US stays out, science and tech evolve under Berlin. Global institutions like the League of Nations never form, and now we see the full picture. A world not of superpowers, but of empires, one where borders are drawn not by self-determination, but by imperial ambition. What comes next? Let's find out together. In our timeline, after WW1, the world tried something new. They gathered in Paris. They redrew borders. They created the League of Nations, the first real attempt at global peacekeeping. But in this alternate reality, there is no Paris Conference, no Wilsonian dreams of self-determination, because the war didn't end in defeat for Germany, it ended in their victory. So what happens when there's no effort to build a new global order? Let's find out. Without American involvement, without British leadership, without French influence, there is no collective peace process. Instead, Berlin dictates terms. France accepts them under pressure. Britain signs its own deal just to survive, and the rest of the world left to adapt. With no League of Nations, no Geneva headquarters for diplomacy, no forum for smaller nations to be heard, power returns to the old way. Might makes right. Without a League of Nations, there is no pressure for self-determination, no push for independence across Africa or Asia, no diplomatic framework to challenge colonial rule. So what does that mean? A longer British presence in India, German dominance in Africa, Japan expands unchecked. In Asia, no international body to stop future wars. In this world, conflict isn't avoided, it's only delayed. In our timeline, the League of Nations failed, but it was still an idea that led to the United Nations decades later. But here, That idea never takes root. Europe rebuilds around Berlin's power. Asia watches as Japan rises unchallenged. America remains distant and focused inward. What fills the gap left by the League? Silence, tension, and the slow return to empire building, because without institutions to mediate conflict, war doesn't fade from the global stage. It simply waits. So far, we've imagined a defeated France, a weakened Britain, a controlled Russia, a strong Germany leading Europe, no US shaping the world, science and tech evolving differently, colonialism lasting far longer than in our timeline. And now we see the full picture. Without global institutions like the League of Nations, there's no check on power, no diplomacy, only domination. This isn't just a different 20th century. It's a world shaped by empires, not ideals. Let's keep going into the darkest question of all. Would Hitler ever rise? In our timeline, Germany lost WW1. The humiliation ran deep. Hyperinflation crushed the middle class. Political chaos gave rise to extremists. And from that darkness, Adolf Hitler rose to power. But what if Germany had won? What if there was no Versailles Treaty? No national shame? No economic collapse? Would Hitler still have risen? Without defeat? Without revolution? Without foreign occupation? The fertile ground for fascism may never grow. The Weimar Republic, born from defeat, never exists. Instead, we get a stronger, more stable German empire, recovering from war, not collapsing under it. Hitler remains an obscure figure, maybe a failed painter in Vienna or Munich, with no crisis to feed his ideology. His message has no audience. He never becomes chancellor, never becomes Führer, just a footnote in history forgotten. If Hitler never rises, then the Holocaust, as we know, it never happens. No Nazi party, no racial purity laws, no final solution. But would that mean safety for Europe's Jewish population? Not necessarily. Anti-Semitism existed long before Hitler. Russia had pogroms, France had Dreyfus, Britain and America had exclusionary policies. So would another leader or another nation have eventually taken the same dark path? Or would a victorious Germany have evolved differently? These are hard questions, but they're worth asking. Remember, in this timeline, Russia doesn't fall to the Bolsheviks. The Kaiser's victory over the Allies also means a victory over revolutionaries like Lenin. So the Tsar stays on the throne. Russia remains imperial, not Soviet. And without Stalin, without communist expansion, without ideological clash between East and West, there is no Cold War, no arms race, no space race, no Berlin Wall, no Cuban Missile Crisis, just a different kind of 20th century. So far, we've imagined a German victory on the Western Front. Paris falls, Berlin rules Europe, Russia remains imperial, no Cold War, US never enters global politics. Science technology, and culture evolve differently. Colonialism lasts far longer than in our timeline. And now, we ask the darkest question of all. Would the Holocaust still happen? Would Hitler even exist? This isn't about rewriting morality. It's about understanding how fragile our timeline really was. Because history didn't have to go the way it did. It only took one war to change everything. Let's wrap this up with one final chapter. Russia collapsed under the weight of war and revolution. By 1917, the Tsar was gone. By 1918, the Bolsheviks ruled. By 1945, Stalin stood tall and the Cold War had begun. But in this alternate world, Germany wins the war decisively. They crush opposition on all fronts, and in Russia, there is no October Revolution, no Lenin, no Red Terror, no Comintern spreading communist ideology across Europe, just an exhausted but still standing Tsarist empire. So what does that mean for the future? Let's imagine, without the Russian Revolution, there is no ideological clash between East and West, no Iron Curtain, no Berlin Wall, no arms race fueled by fear of communism. Instead, you get a weakened but stable Russian Empire, recovering from war, not falling into chaos. With Germany victorious, there's no reason for Russia to turn red. And so, the Cold War never happens. No nuclear standoff, no space race, no proxy wars in Korea, Vietnam, or Africa. Just a different kind of 20th century. But just because there's no Cold War doesn't mean there's peace. In this world, the great powers are Germany rising as the dominant force in Europe, Russia imperial and conservative, trying to rebuild itself, Britain weakened and fading, America isolationist, focused inward. So, who fills the gap left by the absence of the US and USSR? Maybe Japan rises faster. Maybe China finds a new path without Mao's influence. Or perhaps Germany and Russia become uneasy allies or even rivals. Because empires don't last forever, and power always seeks balance. One more ripple of this timeline. Would Ukraine ever become independent? In our timeline, Ukrainian nationalism grew during the chaos of WW1, briefly declaring independence before being absorbed by the Soviets. In this alternate version, Germany controls Eastern Europe after victory. So Ukraine remains part of a larger Mitteleuropa plan, a region under German economic and military control. No Soviet domination, no nationalist uprisings, just a quiet land under imperial rule. Maybe it becomes a German satellite state. Maybe it vanishes from history altogether. So far, we've imagined a world where Germany breaks through the Western Front, Paris falls, the US never enters global politics, science evolves differently under Berlin, colonialism lasts far longer than in our timeline, Hitler never rises, The Holocaust never happens. Russia remains Tsarist. No Cold War. This isn't just a different 20th century. It's a completely rewritten modern world. Now let's wrap it all together and answer the final question. Why does any of this matter? We've imagined a world where Germany won the Great War, Paris fell, Hitler never rose, the Holocaust never happened, Russia remained imperial, the US stayed out of global politics, colonialism lasted far longer, science, technology, and geopolitics evolved differently. And now, let's ask the final question. Why does this matter? We often think of history as something fixed, like it had to happen this way, but it didn't. History is made by decision, by moment, by battles that could have gone either way. In 1918, the Allies held the line at Amiens. American troops arrived just in time. Germany collapsed under pressure. But what if they hadn't? What if one general had pushed harder? What if one battle had turned differently? Then the world would look nothing like it does today. Because history isn't written in stone. It's written in choices. Think of all that came from one war: the rise of America, the fall of empires, the birth of propaganda, the start of surveillance, the redrawing of maps, and yes, the seeds of WWII. All of it began in the trenches of WW1. Without that war, there may be no United Nations, no Cold War arms race, no nuclear deterrence, no modern democracy spreading across Europe, just an empire-led world where power decides truth. Would a German-led 20th century have been more peaceful or more controlled? Would colonialism have ended later or never at all? Would democracy still exist, or would it fade into obscurity? Would the digital age come sooner or not at all? These aren't just hypotheticals. They are lessons. Because history isn't just about what happened. It's about what could have happened and how fragile our present really is. So, what should we take from this journey? That WW1 wasn't just a war. It was the turning point of the modern world. From its ashes rose new nations, new ideologies, new technologies, and the world we live in today. Had Germany won, you wouldn't be watching this video on YouTube. You might not even speak English. You might not exist at all. Because history doesn't run on fate. It runs on choices, on timing, and on the people who make them. So, the next time you hear about a war, a protest, a political shift, remember this story. Because a single moment in 1918 could have changed everything, and maybe it already did.